The diner's parking lot was empty, except for a lone semi-truck and a group of young thugs looking for trouble. They spotted an old trucker, white beard, weathered leather jacket, and thought he was an easy target. But they had no idea who they were messing with, or what he was capable of. If you love stories about tough old-school truckers, second chances, and justice served cold, this is the channel for you. Subscribe now and never miss another incredible story. Hit that button. The hot desert wind kicked up dust along the roadside diner, the kind of place where truckers stopped for a quick coffee and a break from the endless highway. The neon sign flickered lazily, buzzing against the dry air. Inside, the scent of fresh-brewed coffee and greasy burgers mixed with the low hum of classic rock playing from a battered jukebox in the corner. The place wasn't anything special, but to the regulars, it was home. A last stop before heading back onto the open road. Outside, parked beside the diner, stood a weathered 18-wheeler, its chrome dulled by years of hard miles. The rig looked as tough as the man who drove it. Leaning against the side of the truck, adjusting his worn leather gloves, was an old-school trucker, a man who had seen more roads, more fights, and more trouble than most men could even imagine. His grizzled beard was dusted with gray, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. A trucker's life was a hard one, but he carried it well, standing tall despite the years of hauling loads through storms, riots, and border crossings that would have made lesser men turn back. He didn't say much, didn't need to. The way he carried himself was enough to let people know that he wasn't a man to be messed with. But trouble had a way of finding men like him. Across the lot, a group of younger men, hoods pulled over their heads, hands stuffed into their pockets, had been eyeing him for the past 10 minutes. They weren't truckers, they weren't regulars, and they sure as hell weren't here for the diner's famous chili. No, these guys were looking for an easy target, and in their eyes, an old man was exactly that. They laughed among themselves, nudging each other as they whispered, their voices low but not low enough. One of them, a wiry kid with a scar across his cheek, smirked as he nodded toward the trucker. "Bet that old man won't even see it coming," he muttered. The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered guy in a red hoodie, cracked his knuckles. "We just need a little cash, maybe his keys. We'll be in and out before he even realizes what happened." They made their way across the parking lot, walking slow, casual, like they weren't about to start something they'd regret. Inside the diner, a waitress noticed the way they moved, her fingers tightening around the coffee pot in her hands. She had worked here long enough to know trouble when she saw it. She glanced toward the trucker, but he hadn't moved, still leaning against his rig, still adjusting his gloves. But something about the way he stood now, it was different, like he was waiting. The gang approached, spreading out slightly, their sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. The leader grinned, stepping up first, hands loose at his sides. "Hey, old man," he said, voice cocky, sure of himself. "Nice truck. Bet it's worth a lot. Maybe you should hand over your wallet, yeah?" The trucker didn't move, didn't speak. He just tilted his head slightly, finally acknowledging them. And that's when they saw it. The way his eyes, hidden behind those sunglasses, seemed to cut straight through them. The slight shift in his stance, the way his hand flexed near his belt. A warning. A quiet, unspoken promise. The leader hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Inside the diner, the waitress set down the coffee pot. She had seen this before, seen men mistake quiet for weak, seen them mistake experience for age. She shook her head. They had no idea who they were messing with. The leader in the red hoodie sneered, taking a step closer. He wasn't used to hesitation, wasn't used to people looking at him the way this old man did, like he was already 5 steps ahead. His boys spread out behind him, a half circle of trouble, hands twitching in their pockets. "I said, hand it over, old man," the leader spat, his voice harder now. He reached out, Maybe to shove the trucker, maybe to snatch something off him. He didn't get the chance. The trucker's hand shot out, quick as a snake, locking onto the kid's wrist. A sharp twist, fast and practiced, made the punk drop to a knee with a yelp, pain shooting through his arm. Before the others could react, the old man let go, shoving him backward. "You don't want to do this," the trucker said, his voice calm, steady. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. For a moment, there was silence. The leader scrambled up, his face twisted in anger, but something else flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. "You got lucky, old man," one of the others hissed, pulling something from his pocket. A switchblade. The others followed suit. One had a length of chain, another a rusty crowbar. The trucker sighed. He rolled his shoulders, loosening them up. This wasn't his first rodeo. "I ain't got time for this," he muttered. The gang moved in. The guy with the switchblade lunged first, but the trucker stepped sideways, letting him stumble forward. Before the kid could recover, the old man brought an elbow down onto his forearm, sending the knife clattering to the ground. A quick kick sent the kid sprawling. The one with the chain swung next. The trucker ducked under the first swing, then caught the second, yanking the chain forward and sending its owner face first into the side of the rig. The impact left him groaning in the dirt. That left two. The leader gritted his teeth, glancing at his last guy, the one with the crowbar. "Get him!" The last punk hesitated, watching his buddies groaning on the ground. He took a half step back. Smart choice. The leader wasn't as bright. He charged, fists up, throwing wild punches. The trucker dodged one, caught another on his forearm, then landed a solid hook to the punk's ribs. A grunt, a stagger, and another well-placed knee sent the leader gasping to his knees. The fight was over before it had even begun. A few of the gang members managed to scramble up, groaning, dragging their bruised pride away. The leader stayed on the ground for a few more seconds, clutching his side. The trucker loomed over him, adjusting his jacket. "Pick your fights better," he said, turning back to his rig. Inside the diner, the waitress shook her head, muttering, "Told 'em." Some people had to learn the hard way. The young leader coughed, still clutching his ribs as dust swirled around him. His gang, the ones who could still stand, watched in stunned silence. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The old trucker stood there, calm as ever, like he'd barely broken a sweat. He adjusted his leather jacket, his piercing gaze fixed on the young thug sprawled in the dirt. You don't know who we are," the leader gasped, trying to save face, forcing himself up to his feet. The trucker smirked, tilting his head. "Kid, you don't even know who I am." That's when the youngest gang member, a scrawny kid who'd barely lifted a finger in the fight, squinted at the old man. His eyes widened. He nudged one of his boys. "Wait, I think I do know who he is." The leader scowled, still trying to recover his breath. "What the hell are you talking about?" The younger guy took a step back, real fear creeping onto his face. "No, man. I've heard stories about an old trucker, a guy nobody messes with. They say he used to run with some of the hardest guys back in the day. They say he—" The trucker sighed, rubbing his knuckles. That was a long time ago. But the damage was done. The moment that realization hit, the gang's bravado cracked. The ones who were still standing took a few steps back, suddenly seeing the old man in a very different light. "You're lying," the leader spat, but there was no conviction in his voice now. The trucker stepped closer, and the gang flinched. Even though he wasn't raising a fist, wasn't making any threats, there was something heavier about his presence now. "Try me," he said simply. The leader hesitated, his fingers twitching like he was about to make a move. But then, he glanced at his boys. They were already backing away, shaking their heads. This wasn't a fight they could win. The trucker leaned down just enough to meet the leader's eyes. "You don't need to prove yourself to me, kid. You need to prove something to yourself." Walk away while you still can." And just like that, the fight was over. Not because of fists, because of fear. The young leader's hands balled into fists, his pride warring with the growing fear in his eyes. His crew had already taken several steps back, uncertain, waiting for his next move. The trucker stood firm, unwavering, like a man who had nothing to prove, but everything under control. Then, just as the leader seemed to swallow his pride and step away, the distant roar of motorcycles shattered the tense silence. The gang turned toward the road, their faces twisting in confusion, and then fear. A line of motorcycles, engines growling like angry beasts, tore through the dust, heading straight for the diner. The unmistakable patches on their leather cuts caught the sunlight. It wasn't just any group of bikers. It was them. The trucker smirked, finally rolling his shoulders like he was just now getting comfortable. "Well, boys," he said, "you sure picked the wrong day." The gang leader's face drained of color. He knew who they were now. This wasn't just some old trucker. This was Reed "Iron Hand" Calloway, former enforcer for the Black Hornets, one of the most feared outlaw biker crews on the highway. He was a ghost, a legend that every street kid had heard whispered stories about. A man who had walked away from the life, or so they thought. And now, his old crew had just rolled into town. The bikers pulled up hard, dust kicking up as they cut their engines. A mountain of a man with a graying beard and an arm full of tattoos swung off his ride first, stepping toward Reed. His voice was a deep rumble. "Trouble, old man?" Reed let out a small chuckle. "Nothing I couldn't handle." The leader of the gang looked from Reed to the bikers and back again. He was outnumbered, outclassed, and way out of his league. Then, one of the bikers noticed the kid's hoodie. A sharp laugh cut through the tension. "Wait a damn second. These little punks roll with Nathan Crow." The gang leader's head snapped up at the name, eyes wide. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You run with Crow?" The kid said nothing. Another biker let out a whistle. "Oh, that's Rich," he said. "Crow's been trying to muscle in on our routes for years. Guess he figured he'd send some rookies to test the waters." Reed shook his head. "I don't like being tested." The leader's breathing quickened. He'd been warned. Nathan had told him the highways belonged to ghosts of the past, that there were men who had built their legends in the shadows of the asphalt. He hadn't believed it, until now. One of Reed's old crew cracked his knuckles. "So, what do we do with them?" For a moment, the leader thought this was it. They were done. Reed stared at him for a long second, then shook his head. "Let 'em go." The bikers groaned, but Reed held up a hand. "They don't need us to teach them a lesson. They already learned it." He took a slow step forward until he was face to face with the young thug. "You go back to Crow. You tell him this highway is still mine. And if I see any of you again..." The silence finished his sentence. The gang didn't need another warning. They turned and bolted, stumbling over themselves to get to their car. Within seconds, tires screeched, and they were gone, disappearing into the dust of the desert road. The bikers laughed, but Reed just turned back to the diner, stepping inside like nothing had happened. He wasn't a legend because of his fists. He was a legend because he never had to use them. The dust settled outside the diner, leaving behind only the distant echo of fading engines. Inside, Reed Calloway took his seat back at the counter, as if nothing had happened. The waitress, an older woman with a knowing smile, slid a fresh cup of black coffee in front of him without a word. A few of the bikers followed him in, their boots heavy against the wooden floor. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard and road-worn leather, leaned against the counter. "You always did know how to handle things without throwing a punch," he muttered. Reed sipped his coffee, his eyes fixed on the window where the young punks had just fled. "Violence is the last refuge of the desperate," he said. "They were just kids, stupid, but not beyond saving." The biker let out a short laugh. You've gone soft in your old age. Reed's lips twitched into a faint smirk. Soft enough to still have my teeth, unlike you. The whole diner chuckled. Even the truckers at the far end of the room, men who had been silently watching, gave approving nods. They had seen enough fights in their lives to know that the most dangerous men weren't the loudest. But as the laughter faded, one of the younger bikers leaned forward. He wasn't laughing. "What if they come back?" he asked, his voice quiet but serious. Reed met his gaze. "Then they'll find out that I don't make warnings twice." The young man swallowed hard. The thing about men like Reed Calloway was that they didn't make threats. They stated facts. Another trucker, an older man with a weathered face, spoke up from the far side of the counter. "You ever think about coming back, Reed? To the road full time?" Reed sighed, running a hand over his gray beard. "I think about a lot of things," he admitted. "But the road's different now. Used to be, a man's word meant something. Now it's all about greed, territory, and people with no respect for the asphalt they drive on." The older trucker nodded slowly. "Yeah, but that's why men like you still matter." Reed looked at him, really looked, and he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not the kind that came from fear, the kind that came from knowing. Reed finished his coffee and stood up, pulling a few crumpled bills from his pocket and tossing them onto the counter. "Well, boys, it's been fun," he said, stretching his arms like a man with places to be. "But I got a long road ahead." The bikers watched him walk toward the door. The young one, the one who had asked what would happen if the gang came back, spoke up again. "Where you headed?" Reed paused at the doorway, looking out at the setting sun. He didn't answer right away. Then, after a moment, he glanced back over his shoulder. "Wherever I'm needed." With that, he stepped outside, climbed into his rig, and fired up the engine. The deep growl of the diesel echoed through the diner parking lot as he shifted gears and rolled out onto the open road. The bikers and truckers watched him go, his taillights disappearing into the horizon. One of the men let out a low whistle. "Damn shame," he muttered. The young biker turned to him. "What is?" The man smirked. "That those kids never knew who they were messing with until it was too late." The young man thought about that for a long time. And as the last bit of dust settled from Reed Calloway's departure, he realized something else. Some legends never die. They just keep moving forward.